The amphitheater of the Galactic Academy was filled with students from across the known universe. Young aliens of every shape and size had gathered in the massive circular room, their bodies ranging from tiny floating spheres to massive creatures that took up 3 seats each. The artificial starlight above them created a soft glow that made the room feel like it was floating in space itself. Professor Krixveth stood at the center of the room. He was a Vorlani, an ancient species known for their wisdom and their strange, translucent skin that seemed to shift colors depending on their mood. He had 4 eyes, each one capable of looking in a different direction. And right now all 4 were scanning his students with the careful attention of a teacher who had been doing this for over 200 years. His voice carrying through the universal translators that every student wore. We will discuss something that the Galactic Council does not want you to know. We will discuss the human exclusion protocols. A wave of whispers passed through the room like wind through tall grass. Every student knew about the protocols. Every child in the galaxy had heard stories about the strange creatures called humans. They came from a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star in a quiet corner of the galaxy. They were soft, weak, and short-lived. Most species lived for hundreds of years, but humans were lucky to see a single century, and yet, for reasons that nobody seemed to understand, humans were completely banned from participating in any form of galactic warfare. They could trade with other species. They could travel between stars. They could even join diplomatic missions. But they could never, under any circumstances, fight in the wars that sometimes broke out between the great powers of the galaxy. Zintara raised her manipulator arm. She was a Kathrani, a reptilian species covered in beautiful iridescent scales that changed color with her emotions. Right now they were shifting between curious blue and skeptical orange. Professor, my clutch mother served in the border fleet for 60 years. She told me humans were banned because they were too weak. She said they could not survive the conditions of real combat. Their bodies are too fragile, their lifespans too short. Professor Krixveth made a sound that his species used to express sad amusement. That is indeed the official explanation, young one. It is the story we tell ourselves. It is the story we tell our children. It helps us sleep better during the dark cycle. From the back of the room, a deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. Then what is the truth, Professor? The speaker was Rek Amulgrathi. His species resembled massive stone creatures, standing over 3 meters tall with bodies that looked like they were carved from living rock. Despite their frightening appearance, the Mulgrathi were known as gentle philosophers, who spent most of their time contemplating the nature of existence. The old professor moved slowly to his console, pressed several buttons. The lights in the amphitheater dimmed, and a holographic display flickered to life in the center of the room. It showed a small blue planet with white clouds and vast oceans, orbiting a yellow sun. Earth, Professor Krixveth said softly, the human homeworld. To understand why humans are truly banned from galactic warfare, we must first understand what humans actually are. Not what we assume them to be, but what they truly are beneath their soft skin and friendly smiles. He pressed another button, and the display changed to show biological data. Charts and graphs appeared, along with images of human anatomy. Humans are what their own scientists call persistence predators. This is a very important term, so I want you all to remember it. On their homeworld, humans did not evolve sharp claws like the Kathrani. They did not develop armored bodies like the Mulgrathi. They did not grow venomous stingers or acidic blood or any of the thousands of natural weapons that other predator species developed. Then how did they hunt? Asked a Drelvan student. His species were floating gas bags that communicated through musical tones. And his translator gave his question a singing quality. How did they survive as predators without weapons? An excellent question, the professor replied. Humans developed something far more terrifying than claws or venom. They developed the ability to simply never stop. He pulled up footage from Earth's ancient history. It showed a group of humans, primitive by any standard, chasing a 4-legged animal across a vast plain under a blazing sun. This is called persistence hunting. Humans cannot run faster than their prey. They cannot overpower it with strength. But they can do something that almost no other creature on their planet could do. They can keep moving long after other animals have collapsed from exhaustion. Their bodies are designed to regulate heat through sweating, allowing them to remain active for hours in conditions that would kill most species. They would chase an animal for an entire day, sometimes longer, until it simply fell down and could not get up again. Zintara's scales had shifted to a pale white color that indicated unease. They tire their prey to death. Exactly. And this has shaped their entire psychology as a species. Humans do not believe in quick victories. Deep in their genetic memory is the understanding that victory comes not from overwhelming force, but from simply refusing to give up. They will continue pursuing a goal long after any reasonable creature would have abandoned it as hopeless. The professor changed the display again, this time showing a human skeleton with detailed annotations. Their bodies reflect this persistence. Their bones are not static like ours. They constantly break down and rebuild themselves, becoming stronger in response to stress. Humans can lose limbs and survive. They can be poisoned, burned, frozen, infected with diseases, and yet continue to function. Their immune system fights invaders by deliberately raising the temperature of the entire body, essentially cooking themselves from the inside to kill the infection. They damage themselves to fight sickness, Rek asked, his rocky face somehow expressing disbelief. Regularly. Humans call it a fever, and they consider it a normal part of life. They also deliberately inject weakened versions of diseases into their bodies to train their immune systems. They consume substances they know are mildly poisonous because they enjoy the effects. They engage in physical activities that break their bones and tear their muscles, then allow their bodies to heal stronger than before. A young Sylvari student near the front row let out a soft glow of alarm. Her species communicated partly through bioluminescent patches on their skin, and the bright flash indicated distress. Professor, they sound insane. By our standards, perhaps they are. But this is only the beginning of our lesson. This is merely the biological context for what I am about to show you. Professor Krixveth's voice grew heavy with an emotion that his translator struggled to convey. The true story begins 60 years before the exclusion protocols were written. During the first contact between humanity and the wider galactic community, he dimmed the lights further, and the amphitheater fell into almost complete darkness. Only the soft glow of the holographic display and the bioluminescence of certain students provided any light. What I am about to show you has been classified by the Galactic Council at the highest level. Accessing these records without authorization carries a penalty of complete memory erasure. The Council does not want anyone to know what truly happened. The old professor looked at his students with all four of his ancient eyes. "I am very old," he said, "and I no longer care about such penalties. You deserve to know the truth about why the galaxy fears humanity. You deserve to know what we awakened when we made first contact with Earth." He pressed a button, and the display changed to show a massive warship bearing unfamiliar insignia. This is where our true lesson begins. This is the story of the Tarka incident, and the woman named Linda Vance who taught the galaxy what humans become when you take everything from them. The holographic display showed a fleet of warships moving through the darkness of space. They were massive vessels, each one bristling with weapons and carrying thousands of warriors. The insignia on their hulls belonged to the Tarkon Empire, a species that had dominated this sector of the galaxy for over 1,000 years. Professor Krixveth let his students study the image before speaking. The Tarka were the supreme military power of their era. They had conquered over 200 worlds and enslaved dozens of species. Their warriors were born in combat corchets, where only the strongest survived. By the time a Tarkan reached adulthood, they had already killed at least 3 of their siblings in ritual combat. "I have read about them," Zintara said. "They were eventually defeated by the coalition of free worlds." "Yes. Eventually, yes. But that is a story for another day. Today we focus on what happened when the Tarka discovered humanity." The professor pulled up a star chart showing a small solar system at the edge of explored space. The humans had only recently developed faster-than-light travel when the Tarka found them. They had established a few small colonies on nearby worlds, simple farming settlements with minimal defenses. The display zoomed in on one particular planet. A green and brown world with vast plains and mountain ranges. This is New Montana. It was home to approximately 40,000 human colonists, mostly farmers and their families. The planet had a defensive garrison of exactly 200 soldiers equipped with basic weapons. Rex shifted his massive stone body. 200 soldiers cannot defend a planet against the Tarka. No, they cannot. And the Tarka knew this. When their scout ships discovered New Montana, they saw exactly what everyone sees when they first encounter humans. A primitive species barely capable of space travel. Soft-bodied and short-lived. With no significant military capability, Professor's eyes darkened with something that might have been anger. They saw easy prey. Easy slaves. The holographic display changed to show 70 Tarkon warships entering orbit around New Montana. The Tarkin commander, Highblade Vorix, committed what he considered a modest occupation force. 10,000 warriors with full control of the skies above the planet. He expected the conquest to take less than a day. Did the humans surrender? Asked the Drelvan student, his gas sack inflating with nervous anticipation. Highblade Vorix sent a message to the colony demanding immediate and unconditional surrender. He promised that those who submitted peacefully would be treated fairly as slaves, and that those who resisted would be made examples of. The human commander of the garrison was a woman named Linda Vance. She was 43 years old. Before the colony was established, she had worked as an agricultural coordinator, organizing farming operations and crop distributions. She had received basic military training 20 years earlier as part of a standard civilian preparedness program. But she had never seen actual combat, an administrator Zintara said, her scales flickering with confusion. They put an administrator in charge of their military. The colony was not expecting to be attacked. Linda Vance was simply the most senior person with any military training at all. She was a mother of two, a bureaucrat who spent most of her time managing food supplies and arguing with farmers about irrigation schedules. Professor Crixveth pulled up an image of Linda Vance. She was an ordinary-looking human woman with brown hair and tired eyes. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance. Nothing that suggested she was anything other than what she seemed. A middle-aged administrator who had ended up in a position she never wanted. When Highblade Vorix demanded surrender, Linda Vance sent back a single-word response: no. The amphitheater fell silent. The Tarka began their landing operations within the hour. 10,000 warriors descended on New Montana in dropships, establishing forward bases and beginning systematic sweeps of the colony settlements. The display showed footage from Tarkin helmet cameras, warriors in heavy armor moving through empty streets and abandoned buildings. But when they reached the main settlement, they found it empty. The civilians had vanished. Where did they go? Asked the Silvari student. Into the mountains. Linda Vance had ordered a complete evacuation within minutes of receiving the surrender demand. Every man, woman, and child had fled into the surrounding wilderness, taking only what they could carry. They left behind their homes, their possessions, their entire lives. But they remained free. The professor changed the footage to show Tarkin patrols moving through rough terrain, searching for the missing colonists. Highblade Vorix was not concerned. He had orbital sensors that could track heat signatures. He had warriors trained in wilderness pursuit. He had complete air superiority. Finding 40,000 refugees in the mountains would take time, but it was inevitable, so he began the hunt. Yes, and that is when things began to go wrong for the Tarka. The footage showed a Tarkin patrol moving through a narrow canyon. There were 12 warriors, all heavily armed, all confident in their superiority. Then, without warning, the canyon walls exploded. Rocks and debris buried 6 of the warriors instantly. The survivors looked around in confusion, trying to identify where the attack had come from. They never found out. One by one, they dropped, struck by projectiles fired from positions they could not see. The entire patrol was eliminated in less than a minute. Linda Vance had split her 200 soldiers into groups of 4, Professor Crixveth explained. These groups operated independently, striking Tarkin positions and then disappearing before any response could be organized. They targeted supply convoys, communication equipment, and isolated patrols. They planted explosives on trails and in abandoned buildings. They poisoned water sources that the Tarka were using. Guerrilla warfare wreck rumbled. Many species have used such tactics, it's true, but what made the humans different was their creativity and their complete disregard for what other species would consider acceptable behavior. The professor pulled up a list of incidents from the first week of the occupation. The Tarka lost 600 warriors in 7 days. Some were killed in ambushes. Some triggered explosive traps. Some died from poisons that the humans had synthesized from local plants. And some, he hesitated. Some were killed in ways that the Tarkon commanders refused to describe in their official reports. Zintara's scales had gone completely pale. What do you mean? The humans learned very quickly that the Tarka feared certain things. They feared darkness. They feared enclosed spaces. They feared the unknown. And the humans exploited these fears with terrible efficiency. The professor's voice was heavy. Warriors would disappear in the night, and their bodies would be found the next morning arranged in disturbing patterns. Messages would be left written in Tarkon blood, promising worse to come. The psychological effect was devastating. "This is not warfare," the Drelvan student said, his musical voice discordant with distress. "This is something else." Yes, the humans have a word for it. They call it terror. And Linda Vance had become very good at creating it. The professor paused, letting his students absorb what they had learned. After 6 weeks, Highblade Vorix was becoming desperate. He had lost over 1,000 warriors and had not captured a single human civilian. His supply lines were constantly disrupted. His warriors were afraid to leave their bases after dark. Morale was collapsing. So he made a decision that would change everything. The display showed a group of human soldiers being led through a Tarkan camp in chains. There were 12 of them, captured during a failed ambush. They were bruised and bloodied, but they walked with their heads held high. Among the captured, Professor Crixveth said softly, was Linda Vance's 17-year-old son. Peter, the amphitheater went completely silent. Highblade Vorix believed he had found his victory. He broadcast a message across the planet, showing the prisoners and demanding that Linda Vance surrender herself and all remaining resistance fighters. If she refused, the prisoners would be publicly executed. The professor's 4 eyes closed briefly, as if he could not bear to look at what came next. Linda Vance did not surrender, and Highblade Vorix, true to his word, executed all 12 prisoners in front of cameras that broadcast the images across the entire planet. Her son Zintara whispered, "He killed her son." Yes, and in doing so, Highblade Vorix made the worst mistake of his life. He believed that killing Peter Vance would break the human resistance. Instead, he transformed Linda Vance into something that the Tarka had no defense against. Professor Crixveth opened his eyes and looked at his students with an expression of profound sadness. He created a human with nothing left to lose. Professor Crixveth stood in the center of the darkened amphitheater, his translucent skin shifting through colors that had no names in most languages. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, yet every student heard him perfectly. After the execution of her son, Linda Vance went completely silent for 3 days. No attacks, no messages, nothing. The mountains where the human resistance had been hiding became as quiet as a tomb. The holographic display showed Tarkan scouts moving cautiously through the wilderness, finding abandoned campsites and cold fire pits. There was no sign of the humans anywhere. Highblade Vorix believed he had one. He assumed that Linda Vance was broken by grief, that watching her son die had finally destroyed her will to fight. He sent messengers into the mountains carrying terms of surrender. Give up now. The remaining colonists would be allowed to live as slaves. Resist, and everyone would die. Did she respond? Asked Rek, his deep voice filling the silence. She responded. The professor's 4 eyes darkened. She sent the messengers back, but she did not send them back in one piece. The display changed to show evidence photographs from Tarkon military archives. They had been classified at the highest level, and several students made sounds of distress when they saw what the images contained. Each messenger was returned to a different Tarkin outpost, delivered during the night when no one was watching. Each body had been divided into 17 pieces. The number was not random. There were 17 Tarkin outposts on New Montana. Linda Vance wanted every single one of them to receive a personal message. Zintara's scales had gone completely white, a sign of deep fear in her species. She did this herself? The evidence suggests she did most of the work personally, yes. Along with the remains, she included a written note. It said, "You have made this personal. I will teach you what that means." Professor Krixveth pulled up a timeline that covered the next 6 months. It was filled with incident reports, casualty figures, and psychological evaluations of Tarkin soldiers. What followed became known as the Long Night Campa. IGN. Human military historians consider it one of the most effective examples of asymmetric warfare ever conducted. At this point, Linda Vance had 163 soldiers remaining. The Tarka had reinforced their garrison to 15,000 warriors. "Those odds are beyond impossible," the Drelvan student said. 100 against 15,000 is not a battle. It is a massacre. You are correct. It should have been a massacre. But humans do not calculate odds the way we do. To them, impossible simply means not yet accomplished. And Linda Vance had stopped caring about survival. She had only one goal remaining: to make the Tarka pay for what they had done to her son. Every single one of them. The display began cycling through incident reports. Each one described a different attack, a different method, a different nightmare. Tarkin officers began dying in their sealed quarters with no sign of how the killer had entered or exited. Entire squads would vanish during routine patrols, and their equipment would be found days later arranged in patterns. That seemed to have some terrible meaning that no one could decipher. Supply ships in orbit exploded without warning, sabotaged by methods that the Tarkon engineers could not identify or defend against. "How?" asked the Silvari student, her bioluminescent patches flickering rapidly with distress. "How could so few humans cause so much damage?" Humans are creative when they are motivated, and nothing motivates a human like revenge. The professor pulled up personnel files, showing Tarkin officers, their family information highlighted. Linda Vance developed a particular specialization. She began targeting officers who had families. Not killing them immediately, but letting them know that she knew about their loved ones. She would leave evidence in their quarters proving that she knew the names of their mates and offspring. She knew where their spawning pools were located back on the Tarkon homeworld. She knew the routes their children took to their education centers. She threatened children? Rek asked, his stone face somehow expressing horror. She never harmed a single Tarkin child. She never had to. The threat alone was enough. Tarkin officers began suffering what humans call psychological breakdowns. They could not sleep. They could not focus. They spent all their time trying to send warnings to their families, begging them to go into hiding. Within 4 months, Tarkon officers were refusing deployment to New Montana. They would rather face execution for cowardice than face Linda Vance. The professor showed a report from Highblade Vorix himself. Written in his private journal, "The human female haunts us like a spirit of death. She is everywhere and nowhere. My warriors see her in every shadow, hear her in every sound. Yesterday, one of my lieutenants shot 3 of his own soldiers because he thought they were human infiltrators. The day before, a patrol refused to enter a building because they smelled something they could not identify. They burned the building to the ground rather than go inside. We are becoming the very thing we sought to conquer. Afraid." Highblade. Vorix was recalled in disgrace after he executed 6 of his own commanders for refusing to lead operations against the human resistance. The Tarkin High Command replaced him with a younger officer, who promised to end the conflict within 1 month. Did he succeed? Zintara asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. He died on his 3rd day on the planet. His sealed command shuttle exploded while he was inside it. The explosion was traced to a device that had been planted inside the shuttle before it ever left the Tarkon homeworld. Linda Vance had somehow arranged for the sabotage to occur light years away. months in advance, knowing that eventually a new commander would be sent. The amphitheater had become very quiet. Even the Molegrathi, a species known for their calm demeanor, seemed unsettled. The campaign lasted 7 months in total. By the end, the Tarkin occupation force had suffered over 4,000 casualties. Linda Vance had lost 18,900 of her soldiers. 0 civilians were killed or captured. The professor displayed the final statistics. The Tarkin Empire officially abandoned New Montana and declared the planet cursed. They never attempted to colonize human space again. What happened to Linda Vance? Asked a student from the middle rows. She survived the war. She helped rebuild the colony. She lived to be 78 years old and died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her grandchildren. The professor paused. Her daughter had married and had 3 children of her own. Linda spent her final years teaching them how to grow vegetables and telling them stories about their Uncle Peter. She became normal again. The Silvari student's glow had stabilized somewhat. After everything she did, that is perhaps the most disturbing part of the story. Linda Vance was not a monster. She was not a trained warrior or a natural killer. She was an agricultural coordinator, a mother, a bureaucrat. Under normal circumstances, she would have lived her entire life without harming anyone. She would have managed crop distributions and argued about irrigation and never thought twice about violence. Professor Krixveth moved closer to his students, his voice dropping to an intense whisper. But the Tarka took her son. They forced her to watch him die. And in that moment, something changed inside her. All the gentle, civilized layers that human society had built over thousands of years simply fell away. What remained was something older. Something that humans carry in their genetic memory from the days when they chased prey across endless plains until it dropped dead from exhaustion. The Tarka did not face a soldier. They faced a persistence predator who had been given a personal reason to hunt them. And once that hunt began, nothing in the galaxy could have stopped it. The professor turned back to his console. The New Montana incident could have remained a footnote in history. An embarrassing failure for the Tarkon Empire? Nothing more? But 20 years later, humanity made formal first contact with the galactic community. And that is when the Coalition discovered that Linda Vance was not unique. That any human, given sufficient motivation, could become exactly what she had become. He began pulling up new files, new records, new nightmares. And that discovery, he said, led directly to the war that never was. The holographic display changed to show a diplomatic vessel approaching a massive space station. The station was called Nexus, and it served as the central meeting point for all the species of the galactic community. Thousands of ships passed through its docking bays every day, carrying traders and diplomats and tourists from across the known universe. The vessel approaching was small and awkward-looking, its design clearly the work of a species that had only recently discovered how to travel between stars. It was the first official human ship to visit Nexus. Carrying diplomats who would negotiate humanity's entry into the galactic community, the humans were welcomed cautiously, Professor Krixveth explained. They were primitive by our standards, barely capable of basic faster-than-light travel, but they had resources that the community needed, and they seemed friendly enough. The Galactic Council offered them standard associate membership. What does that mean? Asked a young Kathrani student sitting near Zintara. Limited trade rights. No military participation. Mandatory cultural oversight to ensure they developed appropriately. The professors for eyes reflected the holographic light. The humans accepted eagerly. They are social creatures by nature. They wanted to belong to something larger than themselves. The display showed images of human diplomats meeting with representatives of various species. The humans smiled constantly, a behavior that made many species uncomfortable, since baring teeth was usually a sign of aggression. But the humans meant it as friendliness, and slowly the galactic community began to accept them. For 20 years, humanity was a minor member of the community. They traded their resources for technology. They sent students to our academies. They seemed content with their place in the order of things. And then came the Vrix. Rek rumbled from the back of the room. Yes, the Vrix. The holographic display shifted to show a star map. A section of the galaxy was highlighted in angry red, and the red area was spreading outward like a stain. The Vrix Collective was a hive mind species that had gone dormant 10,000 years ago. No one knew why they slept, or what finally woke them. But when they awakened, they began consuming everything in their path. Worlds, resources, other species. Nothing was spared. The professor pulled up footage of Vrix drones. They were terrifying creatures, insectoid in shape but as large as ground vehicles. Their bodies were covered in natural armor, and their limbs ended in blades that could cut through metal. They communicated through some form of instant telepathy that scientists still did not fully understand. 17 species were completely destroyed in the first decade of the Vrix expansion. Entire civilizations erased from existence. The Galactic Council realized that this was not a war that any single species could fight alone. They formed the Great Coalition, uniting every military power in the community against the common threat. Every species contributed, Zintara said. Even the Kethrani sent warriors to fight. Yes, and the humans, despite being associate members without military rights, immediately volunteered to join the war effort. They offered 12 million soldiers. The Drelvan student inflated his gas sack with confusion. 12 million? The coalition had billions of warri. Ors. What difference could 12 million primitives make? That is exactly what the coalition commanders thought. But they accepted the human offer anyway. Every soldier was needed, and the humans seemed so eager to prove themselves. The professor pulled up tactical data. Human units were assigned to defensive positions along the border of Vrix-controlled space. They were given simple tasks. Hold your position, delay the enemy. Wait for reinforcements. The display zoomed in on a particular location. A rocky world called Calera 7. It was a strategically important position, controlling access to a hyperspace lane that the Vrix needed for their continued expansion. Position 7 was a small outpost on Calera 7, guarding a narrow mountain pass. It was considered a secondary objective, unlikely to see significant action. The coalition assigned 600 human soldiers to hold it for 48 hours until reinforcement could arrive. Only 600? Asked the Sylvari student. It was supposed to be a quiet position. The main Vrix assault was expected elsewhere. The professor's voice grew heavy. They were wrong. The holographic display showed a Vrix swarm descending on Calera 7. The creatures came in waves, hundreds of thousands of them, their armored bodies blotting out the sky. They crashed against the coalition defensive, lines like a living tsunami. The Vrix committed approximately 200,000 drones to the assault on Calori 7. The main coalition forces were overwhelmed within hours. Units with thousands of warriors were destroyed completely. And Position 7, with its 600 humans, found itself directly in the path of the swarm. They died, the Drelvan student said. Obviously, no. They held. Silence filled the amphitheater. For 9 days, 600 humans held Position 7 against continuous assault by Vrix drones. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found the humans had not only held their position, but had advanced 16 kilometers into Vrix territory. They had captured a Vrix coordination node and were in the process of taking it apart too. Understand how the hive mind communicated. Psst. Professor. Crixveth pulled up after action. REPORTS, filed by non-human officers who had witnessed the battle. The human commander was a man named Gary Walsh. He was 34 years old, a career soldier who had served in various peacekeeping operations before the Vrix War. When the assault began, he had immediately recognized that his position could not be held through conventional defense. The Vrix were too numerous, too relentless. So what did he do? Rek asked. He attacked. The moment the Vrix swarm reached his position, he led his soldiers directly into the enemy formation. Not to die heroically, but to disrupt their coordination. The Vrix hive mind functioned through local nodes that transmitted commands to nearby drones. Gary Walsh reasoned that if he could destroy enough nodes, the swarm would become confused and disorganized, The display showed footage captured by human helmet cameras. It was chaotic and violent. It's filled with flashes of gunfire and the screaming of both humans and Vrix. The humans moved through the swarm, like fish swimming against a current, always targeting the larger drones that served as command nodes. By day 3, the humans had run out of ammunition. Their energy weapons had depleted their power cells. Any normal military force would have surrendered or retreated at this point. The humans continued fighting with knives, with rocks, with pieces of Vrix drones that they tore from the bodies of their enemies. One soldier, a woman named Betty Cooper, killed 37 drones using a metal pole that she had torn from a fence. Zintara made a sound of disbelief. Vrix drones are armored. They have acidic blood. How could a human kill them with a metal pole? Betty Cooper lost her left arm to that acidic blood on day 4. The acid burned through her flesh before her companions could wash it off. She created a bandage from her own uniform, tied it around the wound to stop the bleeding, and continued fighting for 5 more days. The professor let that image hang in the air. A human woman missing an arm, fighting alien monsters with a metal stick for 5 days without rest. When the reinforcements arrived, they found 400 dead humans and 200 survivors. The survivors were exhausted, wounded, and running on nothing but determination. Gary Walsh had lost an eye and 3 fingers. Betty Cooper was barely conscious from blood loss. But they were still fighting. They had never even considered the possibility of giving up. The professor changed the display to show the response from Coalition Command. The commanders were fascinated. They had never seen anything like this. Species with far superior technology and training had crumbled against the Vrix, yet these primitive humans had held their ground through sheer stubbornness. The voice grew darker. They ordered a full analysis of human military potential. They wanted to understand what made humans so effective in combat. That analysis took 3 years to complete. It involved the finest military minds of 12 species, studying human history, human psychology, human biology. They ran thousands of simulations. They interviewed human soldiers and civilians. They examined every conflict in human history, from their earliest tribal wars to their most recent global conflicts. Professor Crixfeth moved to the edge of the light, his ancient form casting long shadows across the amphitheater floor. When the analysis was complete, the researchers presented their findings to the Galactic Council in a closed session. No recordings were made. No transcripts were kept. But the council members who attended that meeting emerged with faces that their aides described as profoundly disturbed. Asked the Silveri student. The analysis found, the professor said slowly, that humanity could never be allowed to participate in galactic warfare again. Not because they were too weak, not because they could not survive the conditions, but because the galaxy itself could not survive the way humans fight. He turned back to the console and began pulling up the classified documents. That would explain everything. Yeah. Analysis found that humans do not fight wars, they fight extinctions. Professor Crixfeth stood alone in the center of the amphitheater, surrounded by his students in the darkness. The holographic display behind him showed the seal of the Supreme Coalition Council, a symbol that represented the combined authority of every major species in the galaxy. The analysis was conducted over 3 years by experts from 12 different species, he said. They examined every aspect of human behavior from their biology to their psychology to their history, and their conclusions were unanimous. He pulled up the executive summary of the report. The text appeared in the holographic display, glowing softly in the darkness. First conclusion. Humans do not fight wars the way other species fight wars. The professor let that statement hang in the air for a moment before continuing. For most species in the galaxy, war is an extension of politics. We fight to achieve specific objectives. We fight to gain territory or resources or influence. And when those objectives are achieved, or when the cost of continuing becomes too high, we stop fighting. We negotiate. We compromise. We accept that some wars cannot be won, and we move on. He changed the display to show graphs and charts analyzing human conflict patterns throughout their history. Humans begin their wars the same way. They fight for political reasons, for economic reasons, for territorial reasons. In this phase, they are formidable opponents, but manageable ones. They can be negotiated with. They can be contained. They can be defeated through superior force. But the analysis found that human wars can transform into something else entirely. Something that has no equivalent in any other species we have ever encountered. Professor Cricksveth pulled up a new section of the report. Second conclusion: when humans believe that their families, their homes, or their very identity as a species is threatened, they undergo a psychological transformation. The political calculations disappear. The concept of acceptable cost vanishes. What remains is something ancient and terrible. A human fighting for personal reasons will not stop. They will not negotiate. They will not accept defeat. They will continue fighting until they achieve total victory or until they are physically destroyed. And historical evidence suggests that even physical destruction does not always stop them. The professor showed examples from human history. Soldiers continuing to fight after losing limbs. Civilians attacking invaders with farming tools. Cities refusing to surrender even as they burned around their inhabitants. Third conclusion: humans do not have a concept of proportional response when fighting for survival. He pulled up images that made several students look away in distress. Cities reduced to rubble. Landscapes turned to glass by nuclear fire. Weapons designed not just to kill enemies, but to make entire regions uninhabitable for generations. In their own history, humans developed weapons capable of destroying all life on their planet. Not once, but several times over. They built enough nuclear devices to kill every living thing on Earth multiple times. They created biological weapons that could wipe out entire species. They designed chemicals that could poison the air itself. They did all of this while fighting among themselves, the professor added. These were not weapons built to fight alien invaders. These were weapons built by humans to use against other humans. Rex shifted uncomfortably. They would destroy themselves just to defeat their enemies. They nearly did. Multiple times. The only thing that prevented it was the certainty that their enemies possessed the same capability. They call this doctrine mutually assured destruction. They considered it a reasonable approach to diplomacy. The professor shut off the display showing the weapons and returned to the analysis conclusions. Fourth conclusion: if humanity ever perceived a galactic conflict as an existential threat to their species, they would not stop at defeating their enemies. He looked at his students with all four of his ancient eyes. They would pursue total extinction. They would not simply win the war. They would ensure that the enemy could never threaten them again. They would hunt down survivors. They would sterilize planets. They would do whatever was necessary to guarantee that the threat was eliminated permanently. And they would do this not with hatred or anger, but with the cold, systematic efficiency of a species that has learned through millions of years of evolution that the only way to survive is to ensure that nothing dangerous lives to threaten them. Tomorrow, the amphitheater was completely silent. Even the species that did not breathe seemed to be holding their breath. The analysis included a simulation, Professor Cricksveth continued. The researchers modeled what would happen if the Galactic Coalition entered into a prolonged war with humanity. Not a border dispute or a limited conflict, but a true war of survival where humans believed their existence was at stake. What did the simulation show? Zintara asked. Her scales had stopped changing colors entirely, frozen in pale white. Every simulation, regardless of starting conditions or strategic advantages, ended in mutual extinction. The coalition would eventually defeat the humans militarily. Our numbers and technology would overwhelm them. But the humans would not accept defeat. They would continue fighting using increasingly desperate methods. They would destroy critical infrastructure. They would poison food supplies. They would turn stars into weapons. And by the time the last human died, they would have taken most of the galaxy with them. Professor Cricksveth moved toward the exit of the amphitheater, his lecture nearly complete. The coalition realized something terrifying. Humanity could not be allowed to participate in galactic warfare, not because they were weak, not because they could not survive, but because if humans ever perceived the galaxy as a threat to their existence, they would burn everything to the ground rather than accept defeat. The exclusion protocols were not a punishment. They were not a judgment of human worthiness. They were a desperate measure by a terrified galaxy to ensure that humanity never had a reason to turn its full capabilities outward.
8.
The silvery student raised her hand, her bioluminescent patches glowing with confusion. But the humans accepted the protocols. If they are as dangerous as you say, why did they agree to be banned from warfare? The professor paused at the door, because humans understand what they are. Many of them are grateful for the restriction. It allows them to pretend they are something gentler than their nature. They can be traitors and diplomats and scientists. They can smile and make friends and pretend that the thing sleeping inside them does not exist. But it does exist, and every human knows it. They feel it stirring when they are threatened. They remember it in their dreams. The persistence predator that chased prey across endless plains. The mother who dismembered an alien army to avenge her son. The soldiers who fought with metal poles and bare hands for 9 days without rest. He looked back at his students one final time. The galaxy is not keeping humans out of warfare to protect itself. The galaxy is keeping humans out of warfare to protect humans from themselves. Because once that ancient thing wakes up, once humans truly commit themselves to war, there is no going back. There is only victory or extinction, theirs or everyone else's. Professor Crixveth left the amphitheater, leaving his students in thoughtful silence. After several minutes, a figure rose from the back row of the room. She was small by galactic standards, with soft skin and unremarkable features. She had been sitting quietly throughout the entire lecture. A visiting observer from a diplomatic mission, the human woman whose name was Catherine Lane, gathered her notes and walked toward the exit without saying a word. The alien students watched her pass, seeing her with new eyes. This ordinary-looking creature, this small and fragile being, carried something inside her that the entire galaxy feared. If any of the students had looked closely, they might have noticed that Catherine was smiling. Not a happy smile, not a proud smile. Something older and sadder, infinitely more dangerous. It was the smile of a species that knew exactly what it was capable of. A species that had chosen, for now, to keep those capabilities locked away. A species that played along with the polite fiction that they were banned from war because they were too weak. Catherine. Lane stepped out of the amphitheater and into the artificial sunlight of the station corridor. Around her, aliens of every shape and size went about their business, living their lives in a galaxy that had been at peace for 300 years. None of them paid any attention to the small human woman walking among them, and that, Catherine thought, as she continued toward her ship, was exactly how humans preferred it. Let the galaxy believe what it needed to believe. Let them think the protocols were about human weakness rather than human strength. Let them sleep peacefully, never knowing what slumbered in the hearts of the soft, friendly creatures who smiled at everyone and bore teeth at no one. For now, she looked up at the stars, visible through the station windows, thinking about Earth and all the billions of humans going about their ordinary lives, pretending to be ordinary people. For now, she thought again, and kept walking.